The RTÉ Rugby Podcast, sponsored by Canterbury. See the new Irish men and women's rugby jerseys at canterbury.com.
And you are very welcome along to this week's RTÉ Rugby Podcast. And what a week we have in store for us, because this Saturday it is a test decider in Wellington between Ireland and the All Blacks after Ireland won last week's second test 23 points to 12. We now head down to Wellington, where Michael Corcoran and Donal Lenihan both are at the moment. Gents, thanks a million for joining us. It's in the evening in New Zealand at the moment. We're early morning here in Ireland, and we're bracing ourselves for an absolutely brilliant week. Donal, this is what it's all about, isn't it?
Yeah, it certainly is. I mean, Michael and I were privileged to be in Dunedin last week to see a first ever Irish win against New Zealand in their own backyard. And I can tell you they don't like it. The reaction has been quite informative on and off the field. I think supplemented then by last night when the lads beat the Maori in horrific conditions here in Wellington. Birch would know what it's like when you're away on tour. You have a test team on a Saturday, you have other lads playing midweek, particularly after losing the opening Maori game, when they kind of bounced back and won last night to enhance the victory, if you like, last Saturday. It just carries the momentum into next weekend. Everybody within the group now feels real. You know, they've contributed, to an important win on tour. I bumped into some of the lads just walking around Wellington today. They have a day off, and you could see everybody was beaming. They were happy. There's a great atmosphere within the group. And now I think it's all eyes on Saturday morning at home, Saturday evening out here. Really looking forward to it.
And Bernard, Jackman, you were on the podcast with us as well last week. And one of the things we were speaking about was the fact that the mood around Ireland wasn't particularly great this time a week ago, but we were saying the difference that a win last weekend just would have made instantly, because you're at that midpoint part of the tour where, you know, it doesn't really matter if there's a cloud over the team. If they were able to level the series last week, all of a sudden they were heading into this Maori game. And now off the back of that, they've had another decent performance. The mood has just improved even further. It's like, it's incredible the difference a few days can make.
Yeah, and that's sport. And in fairness, credit to the senior players that played Saturday in the league. They started it. You know, they got the belief, they tinkered their game plan a little bit and put in a phenomenal performance and exposed, you know, any weaknesses that were there in the All Blacks. And again, the younger guys, the younger brigade, followed up on that, you know, with that performance yesterday against the Maori, which, you know, as Donal said, it can only, you know, give them that feel-good factor. They've contributed to this tour. And they just seem to be very together. I mean, even it's noticeable, you know, in the test matches, obviously they're massive dressing rooms, but all the squad seem to be in there, you know, at halftime together, you know, hearing what's going on. And likewise, you know, the senior players are supporting the lads who played against the Maori on a Tuesday. So I think if they can finish this off on Saturday with a win, it's obviously going to be phenomenal. But I think that given they've beaten, you know, the All Blacks once, given those youngsters have beaten the Maori, having obviously had a very tough first game, this tour has been very worthwhile and, you know, will hopefully help us in terms of depth and continue to build on what Farrell has started so far.
Yeah, it certainly has. And Corky, like Donal said it there right at the start, that the reaction in New Zealand has, I think, informative was the word he used. And obviously he said they don't like it. They don't enjoy losing. What have you seen over the last few days? What has the reaction been to both Ireland and New Zealand?
The word that I heard used early in the week is a kind of good one, actually. He said their attitude is a bit salty. It's not something that happens very often in terms of them losing matches at all. Not I might say matches at home. It's incredible, actually, how when you talk to people, they say, "Oh, you know, we don't mind losing to the Irish because they're good rivals of ours over the last number of years." So it's going to be interesting to see what the bounce back is going to be in terms of what happens here in Wellington this coming weekend. But, you know, we're in a situation where 4 games into the tour, you know, it's 2-2. Now, there's not an awful lot of people, to be perfectly honest about it, who would have said 2-2 going into the final match. A lot of people said it could be 5-0, which is quite surprising. Some people said maybe we might win one match. That could be the situations. Well, everything is on the line this coming Saturday. There's a huge feel-good factor around the squad. And I mean, I've been on many tours like Donal, like Bernard as well before. there isn't a kind of end of season feel about this at all. Normally you have, players and management kind of thinking ahead to maybe next week, what day are you getting back, where are you going on your holidays, all this kind of stuff or whatever. There's a feeling here that there's a job to be done. There's history to be created. And there's a huge effort. As Andy Farrell said, during the course of the week, this is the week of our lives. This is what we've dreamed of. This is what people have dreamed of. There's an opportunity to fly out of New Zealand, regardless of whether it's Sunday or Monday, in a situation where you've won a series down here and you've won 3 out of 5 games on New Zealand soil. And remember, I mean, I've even said it in the past that, on Lions tours I've been down here, those Maori matches are seen as, the sort of unofficial 4th test. Now, the Maori mightn't be at the standard now that they were at, but the victory by Ireland in the midweek game was superb, and just like everything else, winning becomes a habit. So let's see if Ireland can win 3 games in a row.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say, obviously, like that the focus is on this weekend and that there's nobody getting too excited or just attention kind of wandering off into the off season. Like it was something we said on Saturday. You'd send audio back from the stadium to us of people you were chatting to, whether it was Andy Farrell or I think Ty Byrne was another one of them. And, one of the things you could really pick up off what they were saying was obviously they were delighted. There was a huge amount of excitement and enjoyment in what they'd achieved. And they recognized they had done something no Irish team had done before as well. But at the same time, it was certainly a lot more restrained than you would have heard Andy Farrell and the players be after they beat New Zealand last November. It was a lot different to what you would have heard when they beat them in 2018 or in 2016 as well. There's very much an idea of the job is only half done here.
Completely. That's a change maybe in mindset. Some of the work they've been doing maybe with Gary Keegan over the while as well, in terms of their whole mental approach to things. And as I say, that they won't be happy this week that they've won or they've beaten the All Blacks the first time and be just happy with that and settle for that. And they want to go one step further, and that's the mindset of a winning team, the mindset of a champion winning team. And Andy Farrell has said repeatedly over the last number of weeks that they're going to use this tour to hopefully unearth a couple of gems. That's the phrase that he's used. Well, we've already seen a couple of gems in those midweek matches, and that's where the games against the Maori have been absolutely invaluable in unearthing players and giving first hand experience, first team experience to people maybe who, if it was just 3 test matches, wouldn't really get a chance. And I think that's one of the big pluses of what's happened over the last couple of weeks. And
Donal, then looking at the differences between test 1 and 2, like obviously the scoreline's the massive difference and it's the one we care most about, but what did you see was the difference? Like what was it that Ireland did that made sure that they were able to hold on to that good start rather than see it peter away like it did in the first test?
Well, look, I think the crucial areas coming into the game were the set piece and the breakdown. That's what had cost them so dearly up in Eden Park in the first test. Scrum was under pressure early on. Line-out didn't function the way they wanted it to. Obviously, look, you've got to put the performance into context. I think New Zealand had only 15 men for 17 minutes. So obviously, when you play with 7 forwards for that long, that has an impact on the scrum. But that said, I thought Andrew Porter was outstanding up against Tuanga Fassi. He'd been sort of on the receiving end of 1 or 2 harsh penalties the first weekend. His response, I think, was indicative of the response of the team. There's no doubt in terms of their ability to get the ball that little bit wider, was there for all to see. But I think, look, the worrying point of view from, as we know, in the first test, over the line 4 times. On top of that, you had Josh van der Fleer and Joey Carberry failing to ground the ball. I suppose the most pleasing aspect was they continued to create those chances. The worry was before half-time. I mean, at one stage they were playing against 13 men, should have been 12 by all accounts because of so many mistakes by the officials, but that's another topic. But at one stage there was only 5 backs there. Bowden Barrett was in the scrum at number 8 because they had to have 8 in the pack, even in the uncontested scrums. But there was an element of panic there, trying to force passes to get it to space. And there's no doubt it should have been 17-0 at half-time. That would have been a fair reflection on that first half. So going in and typical New Zealand, scoring their try in the red, They had one entry into the Irish 22 in that whole 40 minutes. Ireland had 7 and had only 10 points to show for their efforts. So that's a concern, something that followed on from the first test. The brilliant thing is they're creating so many opportunities, but you won't beat New Zealand 2 games in a row by not taking them when they arrive. And I think, to be fair, they've learned from every outing against New Zealand. So from that point of view, as I say, set piece was outstanding. I think you are the likes of Ty Byrne, no question. He benefited hugely from having 65 minutes in the first test. Hadn't played since the last game in the Six Nations. He was phenomenal. The back row, Peter O'Mahony, Josh van der Fleer is just playing at a different level. So that, to me, was the most pleasing thing, that they were able to, if you took out the second quarter in Eden Park, Ireland played very well. First 20 outstanding. Second half, they matched New Zealand, 14 points all. That second quarter killed them. But there was sufficient in their display to give them the belief that they could win last weekend. And despite the fact that they left opportunities behind them, they did that. I think there'll be a consciousness within the group that New Zealand are going to hit them with everything. So every single opportunity to put points on the board will have to be taken this time. But, that's the type of pressure that they've been reveling in, if you like, since they've come down here.
And Birch, how do you weigh that part of the game where there was obviously the massive frustration in that second quarter where they had a man or a 2-man advantage for large chunks of it and wasted a lot of really, really good opportunities in the 22. But then on the flip side, you also have the element where they went in at halftime having had a bit of a sucker punch. And I would say there were a lot of people sitting at home watching that game and at halftime went, oh, here we go again. This isn't looking good. But they came out and they were balanced and they were measured in the second half and they didn't panic and they saw things out in a very, very level-headed and professional manner. Is that the flip side of the chances they wasted in the first half, where they were able to actually park it all and stay really, really composed under pressure?
Yeah, I think it's better for them. Obviously, they would like to put them away. But I think when you look back at some of the decisions they made in terms of, the options they took when they had those penalties, they were all the right decisions. I mean, Sexton went for that scrum because he knew that would force, he thought it would force the All Blacks to go down to 12 and it would be a run-in. And the strike play they played is a good strike play to play against a backline that's shorter player. Just James Lowe on this occasion dropped it. And probably he was the only one of the 15 players and even the bench that just didn't have, an 8 out of 10 or plus game, which is remarkable. And but you would back him to bounce back. The level of performance across the whole squad was phenomenal. But I think, going into halftime only 10-7 up, given the domination they had in terms of numerical plus territory possession, they could have panicked, but they didn't. They came out in the second half and were much more composed, much more accurate, and put in another phenomenal performance. So it's that's going to be good for them, because we're not always going to get our own way, particularly against a team of the quality of the All Blacks, and we need to stick in the contest and find solutions on the run, and we've done that. So look, we have a very experienced team, and certainly when you look at our experienced players compared to the All Blacks, our lads were exemplary. They have a lot of questions to ask, and it's going to be fascinating how they respond as well. And obviously, we played under a closed roof. The conditions were perfect. Listening to Donal there about the wind outside and Michael, that may not be the case of the weekend. And the weather, in fairness, let's be honest, our skill set wasn't as good as we would have liked in its first test, where the conditions weren't ideal, and we gave away a lot of handling errors. So that's another challenge for Ireland. Plus, obviously, I'm just fascinated to see how the All Blacks react. And their go-to historically has been physicality, but it's very difficult now to bring that level of violence that they have in the past and stay inside the laws. And obviously, they've been burnt by those last weekend. So, the bits of New Zealand media I've been reading, they've been kind of challenging World Rugby around the refereeing and becoming a card fest, etc. It'll be interesting to see what Donal and Michael think. Their reaction to this being, do they feel hard done by, or do they think they just need to sort it out?
Michael,
go ahead. No, there's a tendency down here to blame everything and anything except the people who were responsible. I mean, the bottom line is, we've seen since, there was clarification on certain issues. There should have been maybe a penalty try and a yellow card for the Joey Carberry incident in the first test, like the Fayanga Anuku hit on Mac Hansen. For me, like down here, they're blaming Mac Hansen. I mean, your man comes flying through the air. He lands on top of him, just charging at him from 10 meters. You have a duty of care. But then you see they're kind of scratching their head as well, because I was reading the paper here this morning and they said, well, Jakob Piper, they weren't happy with him. They weren't happy with Carl Dixon the first day. And now the referee next weekend is Wayne Barnes. And they're saying, well, he's the best referee. But, oh, God, then they got a flashback to the quarterfinal against France in 2007 when they lost in Cardiff. And they're still blaming him for that. So they don't know where to turn at this stage. But, they got to look at themselves. And, Birch was talking about handling errors there in Auckland in less than ideal conditions. The amazing thing, and the thing that struck me from the first two games, the first Maori game in Hamilton, and the All Blacks game in Eden Park, I've seen it 100 times before. The skill set and the skill levels that those players, particularly even the young Maori players, because the weather wasn't great in Hamilton on the opening night either, but their skill set was outstanding. We know that young fellas here have a rugby ball in their hands since they're 4 or 5 years of age. But you go back, the extraordinary thing last weekend, and Sam Kane referenced it yesterday in the press conference, under a roof in Dunedin, New Zealand had 27 handling errors. I mean, that's extraordinary for them. So, they're going to have to get those things right and look at themselves before they start talking about officials and cards and all that. But, Michael, you've been at all the press conferences and you've heard the moans and the groans.
Yeah, and it takes me back to something that somebody said years ago, when you point the finger of blame at one person, or you point the finger of blame in one direction, don't forget there's 3 fingers still pointing back at you. And I mean, it's been a bit like that, to be fair. Like everybody, days on from the game, everybody's still complaining about the refereeing last weekend and about the cards and whether it was a red card or was it accidental. Or I've done a few things for radio down here, and I've pointed out to them that before the red card there were 2 yellow cards, and it could have been potentially a red card as well before the first red card. So as Donal said, they do have a tendency to blame everybody else except themselves. That means that they're feeling the pressure, they're feeling the heat. I had a cup of coffee with a friend of mine this morning who lives and works down here. He's involved in rugby, and I said, "How are you feeling about the weekend?" And he said, "I tell you what, mate," he said, "I'm actually quite nervous about it because I'm worried about what this Ireland team can do." And he said, since the start of this tour, Ireland and the Irish squad is kind of on an upward trajectory. He said, "I'm kind of slightly worried about the fact where New Zealand are going. And if New Zealand play this coming weekend the same way they played last weekend, Ireland, he feels that Ireland are going to beat them." Now, I don't know what else is going to happen. We're in a city where the Super Rugby team are called the Hurricanes. So they're called the Hurricanes for a reason. We were at the Cake Tin last night. It was raining at one stage, then it stopped. It was nice and dry, and all of a sudden the southerly wind comes in, blows drizzle and everything around the place. And just even being at pitch level after the game to do those interviews, we had to move into the tunnel underneath the stand to do them there because the wind was swirling and howling. I asked Andy Farrell, I said, how do you plan for Saturday? Or how do you try and, from a kicking point of view, plan for something like that you see outside there? And he said, you can't. You just got to adapt. You got to try and adapt and live with the conditions. There was one of the Maori, I think it was Josh Ioane, had a conversion opportunity last night after one of the tries, and he nearly hit the corner flag with the kick. And he's not that he's a bad kicker, but it's impossible to judge a flight of a ball or anything like that, particularly if the wind whips up. And I don't know what it's going to be like on Saturday. In fact, I don't even know what it's going to be like here, Donal, as Donal will tell you in 5 minutes from now. It's just one of those places. So we could plan for last week under a roof. We knew the ball was going to be dry. There were a lot of mistakes made by the All Blacks last week. And I wouldn't count on that record being broken next week or next Saturday in terms of mistakes and handling errors being made probably by both teams.
Yeah, and Donal, like as you were saying off air before we started recording, as lovely as that backdrop is behind you there, where we can see the lights of Wellington, you said it feels like the window is going to come in on top of you, such as the wind. Wellington and the stadium itself it creates a little bit of intrigue as well just this weekend, because if you look at New Zealand's record in recent years at that stadium, it isn't particularly good. They've won one of their last 5 matches there. The last 2 of them were draws. So it seems to be a ground, it seems to be a location where they have been a little bit vulnerable over the last few years, which just ramps up the interest even further.
Yeah, it certainly does. It is interesting because it's something that keeps being brought up the same way as the Eden Park venue. We all know it is France in '94 and Jean-Luc Sedurni's try from the end of the world, as they called it, that was the last time they were beaten there. It's almost like a comfort blanket when they go to Eden Park. But on the flip side, as you say, it's Wellington and the Cake Tin, and it hasn't been a great venue for them. But and I can see why, because the weather and the wind down here, and particularly when you're a team who likes to play the way New Zealand play, and because of their skill set, normally at the standard that it's at, I mean, they like wind can destroy a game way more than rain. It's so difficult from a kicking perspective, from a passing perspective. So from that point of view, it does create a different challenge. And I think in some respects, it was advantageous that Ireland played in the same stadium in that type of condition on Tuesday night, because they have a reference point. I mean, Johnny Sexton could talk to Kieran Frawley, Gibson Park can talk to Craig Casey, just in terms of how it affected them and what was difficult, what did they have to do to adapt. So even that little bit of inside information, all the Irish players were obviously there. I walked across the pitch after the match and you were struggling to actually make progress. So, I mean, that's the type of conditions that they have there. So it does add another element. But look, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to know that this crowd, they're hurting. They're going to come out all guns blazing. The issue we've seen, and if Ireland's referenced it, when we won in Chicago, 2 weeks later in Dublin was brutal. When we won in 2018 in Dublin, the quarter-final was brutal. Every time we've beaten them, they've come back. They've had massive physicality. But I think, referees are looking at them now. They have stepped across the mark and, they're under the microscope. Referees talk to each other. Wayne Barnes has been down here for the past number of weeks. I saw he did one of the Pacific games there, Fiji and Australia A, I think. So, he's listening to what goes on, and it's an interesting dynamic. The most interesting part for me will be the New Zealand selection. Talk that there is going to be a number of changes. It's amazing, all the controversy around Johnny Sexton and concussion last week. It looks as if Sam Whitelock might be okay now all of a sudden, which could see Scott Barrett going into the back row. I think you could put your house on Will Jordan being on the team. He was a COVID victim, came on, scored a try in the last minute. Apparently, had he not scored the try, Ireland would have been number 1 in the world rankings. Not that that makes any difference. I always say with the world rankings, the only time you want to be number 1 is the morning after the World Cup final. Yeah. So, and David Havili, the Crusaders centre, I think he'll be back in the side as well. So, but look, this is the type of challenge. If you want to win a World Cup, you have to win. You have to win a quarter-final, a semi-final, and a final, 3 weekends on the trot. So you couldn't get a better challenge in terms of having to back up what they did against New Zealand last week, but doing it again this week. And that's where you'll really learn about where this Irish team is, albeit they deserve all the praise in the world for the manner of the performance and the achievement last week.
First, Donal mentioned the changes we're probably expecting with New Zealand. We're not really expecting too much to change with Ireland. Gary Ringrose is out, obviously, but I think we would all assume that's just going to mean Bundy Aki will come into the centre and start after doing so well off the bench last week as well. Would there be any bit of a concern at the lack of rotation we've seen across these 3 games? Because we are, as we keep saying, we're just over a year out from the World Cup, and like just one position in particular, I would kind of take a bit of an issue with is with the back row, where it's been so settled over the last year. And as well as Peter O'Mahony and Jack Cohn and Caelan Doris and Josh van der Fleer have played, across the span of the last 10 matches, only one other game, that Argentina game, only one other game has one other back row been involved in. And that was Nick Timoney when he was ended up brought in after a couple of COVID cases and injury withdrawals on the morning of the match. Is there scope at all there that, you know, is it a little bit too settled of a back row?
No, I don't think so. I think, look, it's Peter had lost his position. Jack Conan lost a bit of form. Peter gets back in. He lays down a marker. Doris looks, I think he looks better at 8. Obviously, that's on the back of a big game at the weekend. Van der Fleer has been outstanding. I think the beauty of having those 2 Maori games meant, you know, Timoney got to play, Coombs got to play, Prendergast got some experience and got to play, and Timoney and Coombs in particular were outstanding, you know, those 2 games. So, look, you want to have massive competition, and I think that those 2 Maori games gave Farrell the chance to, I suppose, test those players out, keep them very much involved in Ireland. And look at, I mean, if that hadn't happened to Josh van der Fleer, you know, obviously there's other options, but Timoney has shown all season for Ulster and now on this tour that he's right up there. But I don't think he's any argument that Van der Fleer is just playing such good rugby. So I know what you're saying. I do think we needed to develop depth, but I think that there's no need to change players this weekend. It's too important in its own right, and those players have got some valuable matches on this tour against decent opposition, not All Blacks level, but decent opposition.
Yeah, so you would be saying that even though it's not, you know, those Maori games, that they aren't official tests, they're doing just about the same job anyway, really, in terms of building that experience. Yeah,
I think so. To be on tour, to be representing Ireland, that's where they want to be, and it'll probably be an injury now if the Irish team, test team, keep playing to the level they're playing at. It'll probably be an injury that opens up an opportunity. You know, that's the nature of it. But they have shown that they're bang on form.
Corky, is if we're talking about who've been the winners so far over the course of the, like, inside the Irish squad, is Kieran Treadwell right up there with any one of them over the last few weeks?
Yeah, I think he is. I think he's had a phenomenal tour, to be fair to him. And I've been praiseworthy of him even when he hasn't been starting for Ulster this year. He's gotten to understand the role of an impact replacement. And he sees that he's a massive part to play when he comes on. And I think Kieran Treadwell has been one of the success stories. It's not that we didn't know about him. He's been one of the success stories of this tour so far. He's been very impactful off the bench. I thought he played really well against the Murray, the midweek game. I thought the halfbacks in Casey and Frawley, I thought Frawley was excellent. He kicked really well in very, very difficult conditions, as we keep saying. Like, they've been good. I think Tom O'Toole has been brilliant in what he's done. And he certainly looks like one who's going to be there for a period of long time. Bernard mentioned Nick Timoney. I think he's been really good also. And it's good to see Gavin Coombs back in good form as well. So they're the kind of the 4 or 5 gems from my point of view that Andy Farrell is looking for. He certainly has got, I would say, what he wanted or what he expected or anticipated out of this tour so far, and to cap it all with the series victory would be just fantastic.
Yeah, it certainly would, and that'll bring us neatly up to our end point, because we're going to have to wrap it here in the next minute or so. But I suppose what everyone wants to know, guys, is what's the verdict for this weekend? Andy Farrell has said already that regardless of what happens, he thinks this tour already has been a massive success. We want to make it even more successful, obviously, though. Donal, I'm going to come to you first with the difficult question. How's it going to go this weekend? That's what everyone wants to know. They've just fast-forwarded through these last 20, 30 minutes, and they're just coming up to these last couple of minutes now.
Well, look, everything would say New Zealand are going to win. There's going to be a reaction. I think their team will be stronger. But I'm not writing Ireland off. I mean, I think they've been so consistent in terms of their performances. The conditions could well make a lottery of the game. We have seen in all the games that there's been cards. It's just the nature of the way the game is played now. And one incident, you go back, Darcy Swain getting sent off in the first test against England. It's the nature of the game. And as a consequence of that, all the predictions go out the door on the back of a high tackle or something like that. you'd have to think that New Zealand will respond. And, you know, they don't want to lose a test series here. They already have the shame, if you like, of being the first team that lost to Ireland in a test match on New Zealand soil. But there is incredible pressure on both Ian Foster and his coaching team, but also on the senior players within New Zealand. Sam Cane's his captaincy is coming under question. His place in the team is coming under question. So that pressure can implode if Ireland can put them under the same type of pressure that they've done in the last few weeks. New Zealand, I think, probably will win, but I refuse to write Ireland off because, you know, I just felt all last week there was going to be a performance in them. Mentally is the biggest test. Can they raise their game again? Can they raise it another 10%, which they need to win? So from that point of view, I'm fascinated. And obviously, look, we're also talking now at a point when we don't know what that New Zealand team is. Sam Whitelock starts. That's a game changer. If he doesn't start, then maybe I'd flip back towards Ireland again. So there's nothing in it. New Zealand favourites, but I'm not writing Ireland off in any way, shape or form. And, you know, I think they are capable of pulling out a back-to-back performance.
Birch, what's your call?
I think Ireland win. I think New Zealand will be stronger with Whitelock, Havili and Jordan if they come in. But I think the pressure on them, there's so many areas of their game wrong. I think Ireland can do the job.
And Corky, last word to you.
I would love to see Ireland win. You know, I've been coming here for long enough, so, you know, to see them win last week was brilliant. To see them win midweek was fantastic. I have great belief in the squad. I think Ireland can get better, and I think Ireland will be better this week as a result of last week, but so too will New Zealand. And as Donal referenced earlier, I've seen the ferocity of what New Zealand can bring from a physical point of view when they're hurting, and they are hurting so much since last Saturday. I'm expecting a ferocious game from them, ferociously physical, if that's even a phrase. A lot of pressure on the match referee, and I think tries are going to win this one. Whoever scores the most tries is going to win this game. I'd love to say Ireland, but I just have a feeling that New Zealand are going to win it. All
right, and that's where we'll leave it. It's 8:05 kickoff this Saturday morning. Live commentary on RTÉ FM with Corky and Donal. And gents, thanks a million for joining us this morning and this evening, wherever you're joining us from. And Donal and Corky, safe flight home from New Zealand. Enjoy the match this weekend. Cheers, thank you.
Cheers, boys.
Enjoy.
The RTÉ Rugby Podcast, sponsored by Canterbury. See the new Irish men and women's rugby jerseys at canterbury.com.